This is Nancy coming to you from my house. Every night we can hear frogs in the woods, and if I went down to the creek right now, I bet I would find some tadpoles. This week's story is The Greedy Frog, a tale from Australia, from the Usborne Illustrated Fables from around the world. Aboriginal Australians often tell myths of the Dreamtime, a time of creation, inhabited by ancestral spirits such as the mischievous frog in this tale. The Greedy Frog. Tiddalik the frog was fast asleep. He had been sleeping for years, curled up in a ball underground. None of the other animals knew where he was, or even if he was still alive. It was only when a powerful storm arrived, filling the sky with booming thunder and pelting the ground with stinging rain, that Tiddalik finally woke up. Slowly, very slowly, he opened one eye. Then just as slowly he opened the other. With a grunt and a sigh, he began to dig his way to the surface. At last, he gasped, when his head popped out of the soggy soil. With one final kick of his back legs, he hopped right out of the ground, landing with a splat in front of a rather shocked platypus. "Who are you?" the platypus stammered, unsure of what to make of this sudden, surprising creature. Tiddalik yawned. "Who am I? What are you talking about? It's me, Tiddalik. Don't you recognize me?" "Tiddalik," replied the platypus, squinting as he tried to identify the frog under all the mud. "Where have you been hiding all of these years?" For a second the frog looked confused. "Has it really been years?" he murmured. He shook his head. "There was a terrible drought, so I decided to burrow underground and take a little nap until the water returned. I suppose I must have overslept." The platypus was incredulous. "You were asleep this whole time? No wonder I didn't recognize you, and you're so thin. Come, follow me. There's a lake nearby. You must be really thirsty." Tiddalik followed the platypus to an enormous lake, bustling with all kinds of animals. Ducks and geese swam across its surface. Herons waded in the shallows, hunting water spiders. Even a crocodile was sprawled out on a far bank, basking in the sun after the storm. The moment Tiddalik saw the shimmering water, his eyes lit up. He had been dreaming about water for years, but he had forgotten how beautiful it could be. He raced to the edge of the lake and took a few delicious sips. The platypus smiled. "I knew you were thirsty," he said smugly, but he didn't know just how thirsty. What started off as a few small sips quickly became massive gulps. "More!" Tiddalik gurgled, unable to satisfy his thirst. He swallowed more and more water, growing larger and larger, while the lake began to shrink. "Stop! That's enough!" cried the platypus, watching in horror as Tiddalik gulped down the lake. But instead of stopping, the frog opened his mouth even wider. Glug! The herons found themselves plodding through mud. Glug! The ducks and geese had to fly away to avoid being swallowed. Glug! Fish of all shapes and sizes were suddenly flapping about on dry land. When at last the lake was completely drained dry, Tiddalik was so big and bloated he could barely breathe. The other animals looked at him with a mixture of fear and anger. Only the crocodiles, seemingly unconcerned by the frog's greed, continued to laze in the sun. "Look at what you did!" yelled the platypus. "Give us back our water." But Tiddalik was not done. "So thirsty," he croaked, looking around for more. In the distance he spotted a long winding river, sparkling as it snaked across the plain. Without a moment's hesitation he set off for it, bouncing and rolling all the way. The animals chased after him, shouting as they went. When Tiddalik reached the river, he opened his mouth wider than ever before and began slurping up the water from the river. This time his gulps were so powerful they sucked in water from all across the land. With each mouthful a lake shrank or a stream dwindled until they were devoured altogether by the thirsty frog. When he was done, not even a puddle remained. Tiddalik was now bigger than a hill, and still he wasn't happy. "I want more," he said. "There is no more," the platypus called from below. "You've taken it all, and it's time you gave it back." Tiddalik scoffed. "Why should I? If you wanted this water so badly, maybe you should have drunk it first. But you didn't. Now leave me alone." The frog let out a massive yawn. "I want another nap." "Oh, no, you don't," the platypus shouted. "You give us back our water right now or else." On hearing the platypus threat, Tiddalik began to smile. Compared to Tiddalik, the platypus was tiny. What could a tiny platypus do to a giant frog? The thought was enough to make him laugh. But the moment he did, his belly tightened, causing a fountain of water to erupt from his mouth. At once the frog clamped his mouth shut, refusing to let out any more. "Aha," said the platypus, watching water trickle down the frog's chin onto his swollen belly. "Now I know just how to get our water back." He turned to the others and began whispering his plan. When he was done, the spiny echidna took a step forward. "Give us back our water, you greedy frog," she squeaked, but the frog just snorted and rolled his eyes. "So be it," she said, and rolled up into a ball. Tiddalik smirked. "You won't be able to pop me with your sharp spines," he said matter-of-factly. But instead, the echidna rolled onto her back and then unfolded into the most bizarre pose. Her long tongue was lolling out of her mouth, her legs were stretched wide in all directions, and she was singing a song in the silliest voice. At first, the frog thought the echidna was crazy. Then he spotted an owl twirling around and around on his feet until he was dizzy. So dizzy he fell over. Alongside him was a koala, juggling mice so badly that most of the time they landed on her face and had to run down her shoulders and along her arms back into her hands in order to be juggled again. The frog suppressed a giggle. It was all so ridiculous. Tiddalik watched as the platypus started quacking like a duck, and a duck started growling like a tiger qual. Even the lazy crocodile was dancing upright on his back legs. The frog felt his stomach groan and clamped his mouth tight shut. Beads of sweat were running down his face as he struggled not to laugh. Then came the eel. She stood up on her tail and began waggling to and fro, tying herself in a series of knots. By mistake, she wove herself into such a tight knot that she couldn't get out of it again. She wriggled around on the floor, calling for help. That was far more than Tiddalik could cope with. His belly let out a great grumbling sound louder than thunder, and a torrent of water exploded from his mouth. He roared with laughter, hard enough that he thought he might split in two, spewing out more and more water with each guffaw. At first the animals cheered, but their joy turned to panic when the water started rising around them. "What do we do?" the echidna cried. The platypus hadn't thought that far ahead. He had just assumed all the water would go back to where it had come from. Instead, it was pouring out of the frog in every direction, making new rivers wherever it fell. "There's only one thing we can do," shouted the platypus. "Run away!" As quickly as they could, the animals ran, flew, hopped, and slithered away in search of dry land until only Tiddalik was left. With an ear-popping burp, a final stream gushed from the frog's mouth, along with a rather confused catfish. "Well, that was rather unpleasant," said the fish before swimming away. "Yes," agreed Tiddalik, small again, and even thinner than before. He felt sick to his stomach and more than a little sorry for himself. "I don't think I'll be doing that again."